I remember the moment clearly, the moment when I stopped fighting. Not because I gave up on love or hope, but because I was utterly exhausted. The fight wasn't just with another person, it was with myself, with the invisible weight I carried every day. For so long, I believed that if I just held on a little tighter, tried a little harder, said the right words, maybe I could fix everything. But in that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop fighting. It wasn't a dramatic scene or a sudden decision. It was quiet, almost unnoticed by those around me. I sat alone in my room, the walls closing in with the silence I had learned to wear like armor. The battles that had raged inside me, between hope and despair, love and pain, strength and vulnerability, finally paused. And in that pause, I found clarity. I had been fighting for so long, fighting to keep a relationship alive that was slipping through my fingers, fighting against my own fears and doubts, fighting the feeling that I was losing myself in the process. Every word exchanged, every compromise made, felt like a battlefield where I was both the soldier and the casualty. The moment I stopped fighting was not surrender to defeat, but an act of self-preservation. It was a decision to stop the exhausting cycle of struggle and to allow myself the space to breathe, to heal, and to rediscover who I was beneath the turmoil. I remember how that realization washed over me like a wave, first gentle, then overwhelming. It was as if a door I had been trying to pry open with all my might suddenly swung wide, and I could step through into a new world of possibility. But stopping the fight wasn't easy. It meant facing the fear of loss, the uncertainty of what would come next, and the painful truth that sometimes love is not enough to keep two people together. The moment I stopped fighting wasn't just about the relationship, it was about me. It was about recognizing how much of myself I had sacrificed trying to hold on to something that was slowly slipping away. I had been so consumed by the battle to make things work that I lost sight of who I was beneath the struggle. For years, I pushed through the exhaustion, telling myself that love was supposed to be hard, that sacrifice was proof of commitment. I believed that if I just endured enough, if I just tried a little harder, everything would fall back into place. But the truth was, the fight was breaking me. I remember waking up one morning feeling completely empty. The spark I once felt had dimmed to a flicker, and the fight inside me had faded into silence. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back, a shell worn thin by constant battle. That day, I realized that fighting endlessly without rest doesn't make you stronger. It makes you fragile. And sometimes, the best way to heal is to stop fighting and start listening to yourself, your needs, your heart. Stopping the fight was a surrender, but not to defeat. It was surrendering to the truth of my limits, to the reality that some battles aren't meant to be won, and some love stories don't follow the path we expect. In that surrender, I found freedom. Freedom to let go of the pain, the anger, the endless cycle of trying to fix what was broken. Freedom to embrace uncertainty and trust that whatever came next was part of my journey. The days after that moment were strange and unfamiliar. Without the constant battle, I felt lost, like a warrior who had laid down her sword but hadn't yet learned how to walk in peace. I grappled with guilt and doubt. Was I giving up too soon? Was I being selfish? But slowly, the silence became a space for reflection. I began to reconnect with myself, my dreams, my desires, the parts of me I had neglected in the fight. I found joy in small moments and rediscovered passions that had been buried beneath the struggle. I reached out for support, from friends, family, and sometimes professional help. Their kindness reminded me that I wasn't alone, that stopping the fight didn't mean I had failed, but that I was brave enough to choose myself. Through this journey, I learned that love isn't just about holding on. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go. It's about honoring your worth and understanding that your peace matters. The moment I stopped fighting was the beginning of my healing. It was the first step toward reclaiming my life and my happiness. I learned that sometimes the most courageous act is to stop battling and start living. And in that truth, I found hope. The journey after that moment was neither swift nor smooth. Stopping the fight didn't mean everything instantly fell into place. It meant stepping into the unknown with nothing but a fragile hope and a promise to myself to try something different. The days felt longer, the nights colder, and the silence louder. But in the midst of the uncertainty, I began to learn what it meant to truly be present with myself. I remember the first time I allowed myself to feel the grief that I had been pushing down for so long. It wasn't the kind of grief that announces itself with tears and wails. No, this grief was quieter, more insidious, like a slow ache that settled deep in my chest and refused to be ignored. I felt the weight of lost possibilities, the mourning of the future I had imagined but would never have. That grief was a necessary companion on my path to healing. In those moments, I found that the fight had left me disconnected, not only from others, but from myself. I realized that I had been so focused on holding on to something external that I had forgotten to hold on to me. Stopping the fight was the first step in reclaiming that connection. I began to ask myself the difficult questions. Who was I beneath the struggle? What did I want from life, from love, from myself? What would it look like to build a future not defined by fear or desperation, but by peace and authenticity? The answers weren't easy or immediate. Some days I felt lost in a maze of confusion and doubt. Other days I caught glimpses of clarity and hope. I took those moments and held on to them like lifelines. I also learned to embrace vulnerability in a new way, not as a weakness, but as a source of strength. I reached out to friends and family, allowing myself to lean on them when the weight felt too much. Their presence reminded me that I didn't have to face this journey alone. Through therapy and self-reflection, I unpacked the patterns that had kept me fighting when my soul longed for peace. I confronted fears of abandonment, worthiness, and failure. I began to understand that my worth was not tied to my ability to endure pain or to keep fighting, but to my capacity to love and accept myself. One of the most profound lessons I learned was the power of forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving myself. I had carried guilt and shame for so long, but I realized that forgiveness was the key to freeing myself from those chains. As the months passed, the sharp edges of pain softened. I began to rebuild a life grounded in self-compassion and mindful presence. I found joy in simple things: morning sunlight, quiet walks, laughter with friends. These small moments became anchors, grounding me in a reality that was kinder and more hopeful. I rediscovered passions and dreams that had been buried beneath the weight of the fight. I gave myself permission to dream again, to envision a future shaped not by struggle but by possibility. The moment I stopped fighting was not an end but a beginning, a rebirth into a life where I could be gentle with myself and open to love, in all its imperfect beauty. I learned that surrendering to peace doesn't mean giving up on love or life. It means embracing the truth that sometimes love is about letting go so something new can grow. And with that understanding, I stepped forward, not with the desperation of a fight, but with the quiet strength of acceptance and hope. The days stretched on, each one a quiet challenge and a subtle victory. I found myself relearning how to live without the constant tension of the fight. The endless trying, the endless hoping, the endless fear. It was as if I had been holding my breath for so long, I had forgotten how to simply breathe. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about the fight for hours. The silence wasn't a void anymore. It was a space filled with possibilities. It was a moment I had been waiting for, though I hadn't known it existed. That moment, when fighting ceased, became the fertile ground from which a new version of myself could grow. I started small, simple pleasures like sitting in the sun, reading a book, or cooking a meal for myself. I savored the freedom in these moments, a freedom I had never allowed myself before. It was a slow, gentle unfolding back into life. But healing wasn't just about rediscovering joy. It was also about facing the shadows. I had to confront the parts of myself that had been buried beneath the fight, the fears, the insecurities, the wounds that had fueled my struggle. Therapy helped me explore these hidden places. I learned to listen to my inner voice without judgment, to hold space for the pain without letting it define me. I discovered that the fight had been a way to avoid vulnerability, to shield myself from the possibility of being hurt again. As I shed that armor, I felt lighter, freer, more real. I allowed myself to be seen, flaws and all. And in that authenticity, I found a new kind of strength. Relationships around me began to shift as well. With the fight behind me, I was able to connect more deeply and honestly with others. I set healthier boundaries, communicated my needs clearly, and nurtured connections that honored my new sense of self. I also found the courage to forgive, not just those who had hurt me, but myself. Forgiveness was not forgetting or excusing, but a gift I gave to release the past's grip and open my heart to the future. There were days when the fight whispered in my ear, tempting me to return to old patterns of struggle, but I learned to recognize those moments and choose differently. I chose peace over conflict, love over fear, surrender over resistance. The moment I stopped fighting was a turning point, a surrender that led to transformation. It was the beginning of a journey toward wholeness, resilience, and hope. I'm still on that journey, learning and growing every day. The fight is no longer my battle to bear. Instead, I carry the lessons it taught me, the value of self-compassion, the power of vulnerability, and the courage to embrace uncertainty. And with each step forward, I move closer to the life I was always meant to live, a life marked not by struggle, but by grace. The moment I stopped fighting marked a profound shift, but it wasn't an instant cure. Healing is never that simple. It unfolded slowly, like dawn breaking after the darkest night. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to practice kindness, especially toward myself. I began to embrace patience, understanding that growth is a journey filled with twists, turns, and occasional setbacks. When old fears surfaced, I met them with curiosity instead of judgment. I learned to hold space for my own struggles with the same compassion I extended to others. As I let go of the exhausting battle, I found a quiet peace settling in. It wasn't the absence of pain. That pain lingered, but the presence of acceptance. Acceptance that some things are beyond my control, that not all fights need to be won, and that sometimes surrender is the bravest act. In the weeks and months that followed, I built a new relationship with myself, one grounded in honesty, forgiveness, and unconditional love. I began to nurture my passions, reconnect with old friends, and explore new paths. Each step was a testament to resilience, a declaration that I was more than my struggles. I found joy in simple pleasures, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the laughter shared over coffee, the calm of a quiet evening with a good book. These moments became my anchors, reminders that life's beauty often hides in the everyday. The fight I once carried no longer defined me. Instead, it became a chapter in my story, a chapter that taught me strength, humility, and the power of letting go. I discovered that stopping the fight wasn't giving up. It was choosing peace, choosing myself, choosing a life where love isn't about struggle, but about freedom and grace. And in that choice, I found hope. A hope that carries me forward, gently, steadily, toward whatever comes next. This is my confession, the story of the moment I stopped fighting, and the journey that followed. A story of surrender, healing, and the quiet courage to live authentically. Because sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to stop fighting and start living.